They say some horses are born to be forgotten, skinny, wild, scarred, and too broken for anyone to approach. But one woman drove across state lines with an empty trailer and a faith no one else dared to have. She only meant to save one life near the end. What she didn't expect was that life carrying a piece of her own soul, along with a secret that would make an entire town bow its head. A gloomy dusk settled over the cracked land of northern Texas, where only the wind and the creaking of rotting barnwood ever broke the silence. A yellowed ceiling bulb flickered overhead, its frayed wires swaying from the decaying roof, casting a dim light onto the dirt floor and dried horse manure that had been left for days. The crack of a whip snapped through the air like a gunshot. A sharp, furious scream of a neigh tore through the stillness. Buckshot, a raw-boned wild mustang, reared up on instinct, hooves scrambling, eyes wide with terror. The lash had carved into his skin like a red-hot blade. The second time in 10 minutes. "Move, you useless piece of trash!" Clint Rammer roared, face flushed with rage, swinging the whip again as if he wanted to strike the horse into ash. But this time, Buckshot didn't retreat. He gathered every ounce of strength into his hind legs and kicked with fury. His bony hooves smashed into Clint's left thigh, sending the man sprawling to the ground like a torn sack. His cowboy hat flew off and rolled into the dust. "You goddamn monster!" Clint snarled, scrambling upright. Limping, he reached for the whip. Then, with a snarl, flung it at the stall door with a chilling metallic clang. Buckshot flinched hard, shrinking against the rotted wooden wall, ears pinned back, body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Clint limped to the stall door, muttering curses under his breath. At the threshold, he turned back, eyes locked on the shadowy figure in the corner. "I'm done with you. You're not even worth the air you breathe." He pulled a phone from the pocket of his mud-caked jeans, a strange contrast against the filth, and thumbed quickly through an animal sale app. "Let's see if some idiot's dumb enough to take this debt bag off my hands," he sneered. "Dangerous, untamable, cheap, slaughterhouse-friendly." Nearly 500 miles away, in a small wooden house tucked beneath the hills of the Ozarks in Arkansas, Abby Whitlow sat silently in front of an old laptop. Night had fallen. The kitchen glowed with warm pendant light, and the scent of fresh brewed coffee lingered in the air. She pulled a soft knit shawl around her shoulders, eyes scanning lines of online classifieds. Most of the horses listed were far beyond her reach, purebred, shiny, expensive, pedigreed. But Abby wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for a broken soul, something like herself. Then a listing hit her like a punch to the chest. Untrainable, dangerous, cheap, last chance, okay for slaughter. She clicked it. The photo was blurry, clearly snapped on an old phone. The horse was gaunt, coated in dust, eyes as dark as midnight. But even in the poor light, Abby saw one thing. This animal had lost all faith in life. Without hesitation, she dialed the number in the ad. A rough, impatient male voice answered. "Yeah, who's this?" "Hi, I'm calling about the Mustang you listed," Abby said calmly, her voice even from years of being a medic on the front lines. "If you want it, come early. It's gone by tomorrow. Don't waste my time," he barked before hanging up. Abby took a deep breath, set the phone down, poured the rest of her coffee, and stood. An hour later, her old pickup truck was rumbling through the night, crossing Missouri, bound for Texas. She didn't play music. Only the hum of tires on highway asphalt and the quiet pounding of a heart still bruised by old wounds. A husband lost in Afghanistan. Soldiers she'd held through nightmares, sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, wishing for something, anything, to heal. A horse rescue. Willow Bend Sanctuary. She'd named it after the lone tree that grew near the creek by her home. A willow, soft and pliant, yet never breaking. By the time Abby reached Clint's property at dawn, the sky was ablaze with red. Texas countryside looked peaceful in morning light, but the stench of rot, waste, and manure made her stomach churn. Clint stood at the gate, cigarette dangling from his fingers, boot propped up like a man guarding an illegal deal. "You the one asked about the Mustang?" he asked. Abby nodded. "Follow me. He's at the end." They passed a row of narrow stalls. The horses inside were thin, patchy, some looking half dead. Clint offered no explanation, just opened a door and nodded toward the inside. Buckshot stood there. No, not stood. He huddled in the corner like a wild thing backed into a trap. His ribs jutted sharply, his body scarred and freshly scabbed. But it was his eyes that made Abby's chest tighten, bottomless and empty, as if every glimmer of light had been swallowed. "How much?" she asked, eyes never leaving the creature. "$1,500. Clint puffed smoke. "The ad said cheap," Abby replied. "It is. Compared to the feed and meds I wasted on him," Clint shrugged. "You want to play savior, fine. I'll take $250 cash. Otherwise, Slaughterhouse gets him in the morning." Abby pulled out her wallet. "I'll take him." Clint chuckled like a man who just conned a fool into buying junk. It took nearly an hour to load Buckshot into the trailer. He kicked, clawed, and squealed like he meant to tear the thing apart. Abby didn't use ropes or sticks. Only her voice. "No one's gonna hurt you again. It's a long road, but I'm going with you." Eventually, Buckshot stepped in, shaking. Abby shut the trailer, leaned against it, and exhaled deeply. Clint called after her. "You just brought home a goddamn nightmare, lady." Abby didn't answer. She climbed into the truck and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of two black eyes watching her through the wooden slats. For the first time, she realized, that horse wasn't dead. He was watching. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere inside him, he still wanted to live. Evening at Willowbend Sanctuary often arrived like a fine mist drifting over the hills, threading through the drooping branches of willows. Abby's ranch sat on nearly 20 acres, backed by oak woods and facing a quiet stream winding through open fields. It used to be abandoned farmland, brought back to life by Abby's savings, sweat, and, more than anything, faith. By the time her trailer rolled down the gravel road into the sanctuary, the sky had turned amber. Buckshot stood still in the transport bay, unmoving, silent, as if he was holding on to the last of his strength just to keep from collapsing. Abby stepped out, opened the truck door, and walked to the back. She didn't open the trailer door right away. She just stood there, letting Buckshot feel the breeze, smell the fresh-cut grass, and hear the soft murmur of the stream nearby. A world without whips, without shouting. "We're home now," she whispered, her voice soft as meadowgrass. It took 6 hours. 6 hours of Buckshot standing motionless inside the trailer. Abby didn't push, didn't pull. She placed a bucket of clean water nearby, a small pail of apple slices, then stepped back, sitting on a pile of hay across from him. The wind rustled through the fence, carrying the scent of pine needles and the last hay of summer. Darkness fell, and the stable lights flickered on. Footsteps sounded behind her, light, steady bootsteps. "Need a hand?" a calm voice asked. Abby turned. It was Joe McKinley, her neighbor. A tall, silver-haired man with the quiet gaze of a dry river. Once a cowboy who herded cattle in Oklahoma, Joe now lived alone after his wife passed. He often stopped by to help Abby fix fences, mix feed, or just to share a cup of coffee. "Maybe just a flashlight," Abby smiled gently. Joe handed her one and silently took a seat beside her. They both stared into the darkness of the trailer, at the still creature inside. A rustling, barely a sound. Buckshot stepped out, slow, silent. His front hooves touched the ground first, head low, eyes sunken, his body worse than the photo. He looked like a bag of bones that breathed. "Dear Lord," Joe whispered, "this one wasn't just beaten. Something broke inside him." Abby said nothing. She stepped forward, keeping just enough distance. Her gaze didn't meet Buckshot's directly, just as she'd learned in war zones. Don't stare down the scared. They need space and time. "No shouting here," she said gently. "No whips, no chains." Buckshot didn't react, but he didn't step back either. And that, for Abby, was enough. Stall 4 had been prepared just for Buckshot. Fresh wood boards reinforced the walls, thick straw spread out with the scent of new grain. A high window let in the morning light. It wasn't big, but it was warm and safe. Abby led him in slowly. He didn't resist. He simply walked like a shadow. For the first 3 days, Buckshot didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't move. He stood with his back to the stall door, head bowed, ignoring the clean water and carrots Abby left each morning. Abby didn't call out, didn't knock, didn't scatter treats. She brought a book, usually Hemingway or Steinbeck, and sat just outside the stall, reading aloud. Her voice slow, steady, soft as the breeze in the woods behind her house. After each chapter, she would close the book, say softly, "Good night, friend," and walk away. On the 4th morning, Dr. Luann Carter arrived. A woman in her 60s, sun-tanned skin, hair pulled into a bun, mud-caked boots, and eyes sharp enough to see things most couldn't. "This the Mustang you called about?" she asked, stepping down from her pickup while slipping on rubber gloves. "Stall 4, Abby replied. "But be careful. He's not like the others." Dr. Carter looked at Buckshot for exactly 5 seconds before letting out a breath. "He doesn't need a vet," she murmured. "He needs time." Still, she stepped inside the stall, calm and steady. Buckshot didn't flinch at first, but when she raised a stethoscope, his body tensed like steel, eyes wide and wild. Dr. Carter stopped. She didn't press, just slowly stepped back. "Those scars," she said gravely, turning to Abby, "they're not all from whips, chains. Maybe he was hoisted or dragged." Abby swallowed hard, her hand gripping the stall rail. "Can he be healed?" "His body, yes. His mind? No one can promise that," Dr. Carter answered. "Horses are like people. Some wounds never close. Are you ready for that?" Abby nodded without hesitation. "I won't give up on him." That afternoon, Abby sat by the stall as usual. The breeze slid through the willows. The air smelled of damp earth and aging apples. Then, a faint sound. She looked up. The water bucket was half empty. The carrot pieces were gone. The hay bin, disturbed. She smiled and turned away, not letting Buckshot know she'd seen. 3 nights later, during a storm, Abby awoke to the sound of rattling outside. She threw on a coat, slipped on boots, and grabbed a flashlight. The rain drummed on the tin roof like war drums. In the pale beam of light, she saw Buckshot, no longer in his corner. He stood in the middle of the stall, looking at her, no shrinking, no trembling, just standing there quietly as if weighing a decision. Abby didn't step forward. She stood under the overhang, flashlight steady in hand, heart aching with the weight of such a small moment. "Hey there," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me you're still here." After that night, things didn't change dramatically. Buckshot still stayed quiet, still kept his distance, but his eyes had changed, no longer empty, no longer lifeless. One morning, Abby dropped a wooden brush. The loud clatter startled her. She turned quickly, fearing the worst. Buckshot flicked an ear. That was it. No flinching, no backing away. He looked at her, then continued chewing hay. And for Abby, that was a miracle. Winter in the Ozarks wasn't as brutal as in Montana or Wyoming, but it was cold enough to freeze a thin film of ice over the water troughs. Mornings often began with a low mist hovering above the fields, as if Willowbend Sanctuary was floating inside a dream that hadn't fully awakened. Buckshot had been at the ranch for nearly a week, but to Abby it felt longer, each day both the same and entirely different. Because even the smallest things, a twitch of his tail, a reach toward an apple, made her heart beat louder than it had in months. That morning, Abby rose earlier than usual. She carried a bucket of freshly cut hay and a thick coat. When she opened stall 4, Buckshot was still facing the wall, head lowered, ears pressed back. No eating, no drinking, no sleeping, not the way normal creatures slept. She set the feed down and quietly sat on the small wooden stool beside the door. Time passed. Light seeped through the cracks in the wall, painting golden streaks across the cold dirt floor. Abby opened an old journal, the one she kept during her time as a combat medic in Kandahar. The first page still bore faint bloodstains. She wasn't sure whose. Maybe a young soldier's. Maybe hers, from when shrapnel grazed her shoulder as she applied pressure to another's wound. She read aloud, not to anyone in particular, but her voice made the air feel warmer. A soldier named Hank lost his right arm. He cried like a child, but not from pain. He cried because he thought he'd never draw again. I told him, thinking that before you've even tried is unfair to yourself. She paused, looked up. Buckshot hadn't moved, but his tail twitched. That afternoon, Dr. Carter returned. "Water still untouched?" she asked. Abby nodded. "I switched the hay, added a little molasses, no change." Dr. Carter approached the stall, watching carefully. "It's not the feed. He doesn't trust this place. I had a horse once that took 4 months before she drank from a trough." "What happened?" "One rainy day, she licked droplets off the barn roof. I set a bucket outside to catch the rain. She drank from that for the first time." Abby stayed silent, eyes fixed on the wooden wall where Buckshot still leaned. "Sometimes," Dr. Carter said, "we just need to wait. Nothing more." That night, Abby left the stall door slightly ajar. She placed a bucket of rainwater just outside and wrapped herself in a blanket, sipping hot tea. The air was colder than the night before. The insects had gone quiet, leaving only the whisper of dry leaves in the breeze. Around midnight, as she began to doze, she heard the softest of hoofsteps. She opened her eyes. Buckshot had stepped out of the shadows. He stood before the rain bucket. 1 minute passed, then 2. Then he lowered his head, 1 sip, then another. Abby bit her lip, barely breathing. "You're still here. Still fighting," she whispered to herself. The next morning she brought fresh carrots, a favorite among the other horses. She didn't drop them into the trough. She knelt, placing small slices on her palm, reaching through the stall gate. She didn't speak. She didn't make eye contact. For the first time, Buckshot sniffed, then licked a piece, just one. Then he backed away. But that brief touch, to Abby, it felt like a long embrace in the dead of winter. She cried, not out of mere emotion, but because she realized something. Sometimes the smallest things are what change everything. In the nights that followed, Abby began reading old letters she'd written to her late husband, Will, who had died in a car accident while raising funds for veterans. Letters she never sent. But each night she opened one and read aloud, for herself and for Buckshot. "Will, today I met a horse who doesn't believe in the world anymore. Just like I didn't when I lost you. I'm not pushing him. I'm just staying near. Like you used to do for me." One rainy night, she didn't sleep indoors. She wrapped herself in a blanket and dozed off in the old chair by Buckshot's stall. The drizzle fell softly, wind curling into every seam of her coat. At dawn, she woke with a start. Something warm had touched her hand. Buckshot. His nose had brushed her skin, gentle, fleeting, as if too much contact might break the spell. Abby didn't move, didn't speak. She just let her tears fall, silent and warm, joining the rain. That touch said nothing specific, but to her, it was an apology, a thank you, maybe even a cry for help. From that day on, Buckshot no longer faced the wall. He began standing toward the stall door, his eyes following Abby as she passed by. When she brought his feed, he didn't wait for her to leave. He stepped forward, still slow, still cautious, but deliberate. One afternoon, Joe came to fix a fence. When he approached Buckshot's stall, the Mustang let out a low, sharp neigh and stomped the ground hard. "Whoa!" Joe backed up, hands raised. "He's not a fan of men." "Maybe, because the one who beat him was a man," Abby said, her eyes briefly turning cold. Joe nodded, stepping away without offense. "He's not mean. He's just learning how to see the world again." By the end of the second week, Abby made a decision. She would open Buckshot's stall and give him a choice to step out for the first time. No lead rope, no halter. Just her, a few feet away, holding a basket of carrots, and waiting. 10 minutes, then 15, then the sound of hooves on sand. Buckshot stepped out. He lifted his head. The breeze tousled his mane. Sunlight glinted off his scarred back. And for the first time, Abby saw it, the posture of a Mustang, a creature born for freedom. From the neighboring paddock, Willow, the gentlest mare, let out a soft whinny in greeting. Buckshot froze, tense. Then, he didn't flee, he just stood there watching. A gust of wind set maple leaves swirling between them. Buckshot held his ground. Abby placed a hand over her heart and smiled. "He stepped out, Will," she whispered, "from that dark corner. And I think we just found spring in the heart of winter." February slid through the Ozarks like a quiet guest. Snow rarely stayed long, replaced by drizzles and muddy puddles beneath graying fence rails. But to Abby, the land had never felt more alive. Buckshot no longer lingered in the shadows. Each morning, he waited by the stall gate for his feed. Though he still kept some distance, his eyes had stopped trembling. Willow, the cream-colored mare, remained his nearest companion, often whinnying softly at him from the adjacent paddock, like two old friends greeting one another. Abby began expanding his world. She opened the gates to the main paddock, giving Buckshot space to see the other horses. No lead rope, no halter, no forcing. Buckshot stepped forward, hesitant, but never backward. From a distance, Abby sat on the old wooden bench, watching. She knew progress didn't always come in leaps. Sometimes it was a horse once broken by cruelty simply standing in sunlight. Joe stopped by one Saturday morning with a bundle of fencing stakes and fresh wood slats. "That Mustang's coming along," he said, lighting a cigarette and eyeing Buckshot from afar. Something in him got broken, real bad. But at least he knows now this place doesn't come with a whip. Abby smiled. "I think he's starting to remember what living feels like." Joe leaned against the fence. "Abby, ever thought about letting him try a jump?" She shook her head. "Too soon. I'm not sure he was ever trained. Or worse, maybe he was forced to jump like a circus trick." Joe nodded. Caution's good, but sometimes the right jump sets someone free instead of breaking them further. That afternoon, Abby dragged a few old planks into the paddock and built a small rail, no taller than her knee. She didn't lead Buckshot toward it. She just left it there, in plain sight. The next day, Buckshot looked toward it. The other horses, Stormy, Gracie, Willow, trotted over it with ease, tails flicking. Buckshot only watched. But in his dark eyes, something stirred. A memory, maybe, or a flicker of instinct. Abby didn't rush him. She sat beneath the oak tree, a book in hand, her eyes never leaving him. On the third day, Buckshot approached. He sniffed, and then, without fanfare, stepped over the rail. Not a leap, not a show, just a step. Abby let out a slow breath. No cheering, no applause, just a whispered, "Well done, kid, that's a big one." But hope rarely comes without a test. 3 days later, while Abby was cleaning the old tractor in the barn, a loud crash rang out. A long metal bar fell from a top shelf, hitting the concrete with a sharp clang. The sound echoed across the property. In the paddock, Buckshot heard it. His ears shot back, eyes wide. He bucked, spun, his hooves slicing the air. He crashed into the fence post, stumbled, collapsed. His whole body quaked, eyes wild with white. Abby ran. "Buckshot," she called, not loud but clear. He trembled on the ground, breathing like a hunted animal. She didn't enter the paddock. She crouched just outside, hands over her heart, voice soft. "No one's hurting you. No one's going to hurt you." It took nearly 10 minutes for Buckshot to lie still, gasping. Abby waited 20 more before inching close, never touching, just close enough to be there. In the still air, she told a story. "Will used to tell me about the shelling at night. He couldn't sleep for 3 weeks. A slamming door would send him into panic. I think wounds of the mind heal slower than any bullet." That night, Abby didn't go back to the house. She sat beside Buckshot's stall, holding her old leather-bound journal. She wrote to Will. "Today, I saw Buckshot step over a rail, then fall apart at a sound. Maybe he's like me. Every step forward is a fight against the past. But you know what? When I sat beside him, he didn't run. He just trembled, and sometimes, not running, that's a victory." The next morning, the sky was clear. Sunlight filtered through the branches, lighting up the wet grass. Buckshot stepped into the paddock again, his eyes still hollow from the fright, a small scratch on his flank, but he stepped forward. No turning, no shrinking. Willow approached, touching her nose to his shoulder. Buckshot didn't flinch. Abby, watching from the porch steps with a carrot in hand, wiped a tear. Buckshot lifted his head, looked at her, then, slowly, walked toward her. He touched his nose to her hand, not out of fear, but something closer to trust. For the first time, Abby placed her palm against his neck. His skin was warm, dry. "We'll stumble again," she whispered. "But sweetheart, you're learning to live, and I think I am too." They stood together beneath the sun. A woman with a heart once shattered, a horse once crushed by fear. But in that moment, they were no longer survivors. They were companions. 3 months had passed since the day Buckshot stepped out of that broken stall in Texas, a place that once reeked of whips and fear. Now he stood in the main paddock at Willow Bend, still lean, still cautious, but no longer trembling. Abby kept her morning ritual, a quiet nod in place of touch. She knew that for souls once torn open, allowing someone close wasn't weakness, it was bravery. Willow, the calmest mare in the sanctuary, had become Buckshot's closest companion. The two often stood beneath the birch tree at the far edge of the paddock, their heads gently resting against one another, speaking in a language that needed no words. But something else had begun to shift. Inside Abby. She woke earlier. She wrote more. She smiled for no reason at all. Joe McKinley noticed when he dropped by that weekend. "You're smiling like my wife used to before she did something reckless," Joe teased, squinting through the morning sun. Abby laughed. "What kind of reckless?" "You're about to do something bold." The boldness had a name, Fall Hollow Equine Show, an annual local horse event held in the nearby town. Abby saw the poster at the corner grocery store, burnt orange background, a young woman leaping over a rail on horseback, dirt flying beneath them. She stood there for a long time, milk jug in hand, eyes fixed on the image. "Not to win," she whispered to herself, "just so Buckshot can see who he's become." She didn't tell Joe, not at first. Instead, she began raising the height of the training rails, inch by inch, week by week. She didn't ask Buckshot to jump. She simply placed the rails there like open invitations. And as he always did, Buckshot came. He looked, he sniffed, then he jumped. The first jumps were rough. He stumbled on landing, caught a hoof once, but every time he got back up, swift and steady. Abby stood by the fence, fists clenched, eyes damp. You did good, real good. One late afternoon as Buckshot trained alongside Willow, the gate creaked open. Abby turned to see a pickup parked outside. From it stepped a woman, holding a young girl by the hand. "Hi there," Abby called out. "I'm Marie," the woman replied. "Heard about your place from a friend, my daughter Josie. She loves horses." Josie, maybe 7, wild hair, sweater sleeves too long, said nothing. But her eyes locked onto Buckshot, who had just finished a clean jump and was now grazing. Abby approached gently. "You like horses, sweetie?" Josie nodded, eyes never leaving Buckshot. "What's his name?" "Buckshot," Abby smiled. "He's my little warrior." Josie stepped toward the fence. Buckshot lifted his head, a flicker of caution in his eyes. But when the girl stretched out her hand, he didn't pull away. He touched his nose to her tiny palm. Abby's throat tightened. Marie turned away, brushing a tear. Her father was arrested. Police said they had enough evidence. I needed a place where she could feel safe. Abby held her hand. "You came to the right place." That evening, Abby called Joe to check the tack. Just a soft saddle pad and light reins. Not to ride Buckshot, just to let him feel it again. "You prepping for that show?" Joe asked, a straw between his teeth. "We're not competing to win," Abby said. "We're just going to see we're no longer afraid." Joe clapped her on the shoulder. "Sounds like my wife when she relearned how to climb stairs after breaking her hip." The night before the show, the sky turned heavy. Wind howled through the rafters. Abby was in the barn, packing supplies when the old tractor sputtered, then popped loudly, a burst of sparks lighting the dark. She froze. Outside, Buckshot screamed, a long, panicked neigh. His hooves pounded the stall floor. He bucked and spun, eyes white with terror. Abby rushed out. "Buckshot," she called. "It's me. It's just me." He tore up the water trough, kicked the back wall. Frenzied. Lost. Abby didn't enter. She sat on the ground outside his stall, palms facing up. "We don't have to go," she whispered. "We can stay right here. We don't have to prove anything." Wind whipped her hair. The scent of oil and smoke mingled with fear. "But if tomorrow, if you want to try, just once, just stand in front of the world for a moment. I'll be right there, every second." The storm calmed. Buckshot didn't approach, but he stopped pacing. His breathing slowed. His eyes found Abby's, not wild now, just searching. She nodded. "Tomorrow, we'll find out." That night, Abby didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, oil lamp flickering. She pulled out a letter she'd written to Will 3 months earlier. She added one last line. "I'm scared, not of failing, but of hurting him again. But I also know, if we never try, we'll never know how far we can fly." The sun had just begun to rise over the Ozark Ridge when Abby arrived at the barn. She wore an old plaid shirt, sleeves rolled high, her hair tied back, a worn cowboy hat slung across her back. Her eyes never left Buckshot, who stood motionless, staring into the empty space ahead, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. Willow had been moved to another paddock to keep the others calm. The morning air was so still, Abby could hear her own breathing. "We don't have to go," she whispered, even though Buckshot was several feet away. "If you're not ready, I understand." He didn't move. Abby reached for the trailer's side latch and pulled it open. The hinges clanked, metal on metal, still nothing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Buckshot took a step forward, then another. Abby held her breath. He stopped at the threshold. The last time he'd entered this trailer, it had taken him away from hell, and toward a life he didn't yet believe he deserved. Abby extended her hand, not to tug, just to wait. Buckshot looked at her hand. Then inside the trailer, where the rubber mats were clean, where there were no ropes, no yells, no pain, he stepped in. The Fall Hollow showgrounds were already bustling by mid-morning. Horse trailers, pips, and voices filled the dusty red lot. Hooves clopped on packed dirt. Loudspeakers crackled overhead. Abby parked far from the crowd, near the edge of the oak grove. She wanted space. Quiet. When she opened the trailer door, Buckshot didn't bolt out. He inhaled, lowered his head, eyes wide but steady. Abby didn't rush him. She took a step back, letting the breeze bring the smell of earth and hay to him. "It's just you and me," she murmured. "They can laugh, they can doubt, but we know where we came from." Buckshot stepped down, slowly, purposefully. As they passed through the warm-up area, heads turned. Whispers started. "That's the one headed for slaughter, right? Look at the scars on his shoulder. No way he can jump." Abby heard it all. But she didn't flinch. When they entered the prep ring, a judge read aloud, "Abby Whitlow, Willow Bend Sanctuary, horse, buckshot." A voice called from the crowd, "Slaughterhouse Special just hit the ring." Laughter rippled through the stands. Abby bent down, gently stroked Buckshot's neck. "They don't have to believe. We just have to believe in each other." The gate opened. Abby mounted, bareback but with a soft pad and light reins. She could feel every breath he took, trembling, but not panicked. The first jump was low, a basic pull, barely a foot off the ground. Buckshot paused for a split second, then jumped. Clean, simple, not perfect but steady. Silence fell. The second rail was higher. Buckshot hesitated, then cleared it. Gasps. "Are you kidding me? No damn way." Then came the third jump, a red-painted metal rail. A loud clang erupted from the stands. A folding chair clattered onto the cement floor. The sound snapped like a whip. Buckshot froze, muscles locked, eyes wide. He backed up, hooves skidding. Abby didn't pull, didn't press. She leaned in, placed her hand on his neck, and whispered, "No one's hitting you. It's just a noise. Not punishment, not war. Just a chair fell, that's all." 1 second, 2. Buckshot blinked, lowered his head. Abby held her breath. He stepped forward. The final rail was the tallest, 3 feet. 2 wooden bars, parallel, barely a hoof width apart. Buckshot pawed at the ground, measuring. Abby stayed still. Wind caught her hair. The scent of damp earth rose from the morning soil. The entire crowd held its breath. Buckshot took off. 1, 2, 3 strides and leapt. In that instant, the world disappeared. No past, no whip, no slaughterhouse, no war, no weeping, just air and trust. He landed, slightly off balance. One hind hoof clipped the bar, but it didn't fall, and he didn't stumble. Applause erupted. Abby leaned forward, arms wrapped around his neck. Tears soaked her shirt. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved yourself." They didn't place, didn't make top 10, but as they walked out of the arena, a little girl ran up. "Josie, Miss Abby, Buckshot's my hero." She wrapped her arms around his neck, kissed his forehead. Buckshot didn't flinch. He lowered his head, soft, slow, like a thank you. Marie stood back, hands over her heart. "Thank you, for believing in the horse no one else would touch." Abby looked at Buckshot. They didn't touch him, because they never listened. That night, they returned to Willow Bend under a sky full of stars. Abby unfastened the reins, removed the saddle pad. Buckshot didn't go to his stall. He stood in the open, gazing at the sky. Abby stood beside him, hand resting on his shoulder, once lashed, now healed. "You don't belong to the darkness anymore." Spring arrived in the Ozarks not with fanfare, but with quiet grace, like an old friend returning after a long storm. Fresh grass pushed up beneath the weathered fence lines, and the scent of damp earth and tree sap filled the air at Willow Bend. Horses wandered the paddock lazily, tails swishing under golden sunlight, and in the center of it all stood Buckshot, like a living monument, steady, peaceful, and somehow sacred. No one could have imagined that a horse once beaten, once sold like scrap, could become the soul of an entire place. The story of Buckshot spread after the Fall Hollow show, not because he won, but because he won himself back. A reporter from the Ozark Sentinel came all the way out. The photo of Abby standing beside Buckshot under a eucalyptus tree ran full page with the headline, "The woman and the horse no one would touch." After that, Willow Bend was no longer a forgotten speck on the map. Volunteers started to arrive. Locals came by bringing hay, carrots, and, more often than not, their own stories. Some cried when they saw Buckshot. Others stood silently, one hand pressed to their chest, as if he had reached somewhere no words could. And something strange began to happen. New horses, though skittish and afraid, calmed faster when they were near Buckshot. Lily, a tiny mare, abandoned during a winter storm, wouldn't let anyone near her. But when brought to the paddock, Buckshot walked over and gently touched his forehead to hers. From that day forward, Lily no longer trembled at the sound of wind. Abby watched it all, heart full of something she couldn't quite name. Not just pride, but reverence. She had once thought she was the one who saved Buckshot, but now she knew. He had saved her. From the darkness after the war. From the hollow ache of leaving service. From the emptiness after losing Will. Now, both of them were creatures granted a second life. One April afternoon, Abby was pulling weeds behind the old stall when a sheriff's cruiser rumbled up the red clay road. Roy, the town's sheriff, stepped out, his face serious but kind. "Abby," he said, "we've got reports about that old ranch down in Texas. Animal cruelty, selling to slaughter without permits. Guy named Clint Rammer is on the list." Abby nodded. "I'm not surprised." Roy looked toward the paddock, where Buckshot lay under the tree, eyes half closed as if dreaming. "We know that horse used to be his," Roy said softly. "Your story, yours and his, it's the kind of light this town needs." Abby didn't reply. She just looked at Buckshot, the look of a silent thank you. Roy turned to go but paused. "Hey, Abby, yes? Do you think I could pet him?" Abby smiled. "You don't need to ask me. He'll let you if you're ready." That day, Roy didn't get to touch him. But 3 weeks later, he returned. No badge, no uniform. Just a bag of red apples in hand. Buckshot approached, lowered his head, let the sheriff's hand rest on his neck. And then, it happened again and again. People came, sometimes not for the horses but for whatever inside them had cracked. And Buckshot, somehow, always knew who needed the quiet the most. A woman with Alzheimer's who'd once been a championship rider suddenly remembered her late husband's name while touching his face. A nonverbal boy whispered "pretty horse" for the first time in his life. A double amputee veteran cried when Buckshot lowered his head to the height of his wheelchair. Abby wrote all of it down. Someday she might write a book. But there was no rush. Some things weren't meant to be published, only lived. At the end of May, Josie returned to the ranch. She was taller, her hair braided, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "Mom said I could come back if I got an A in math." She grinned. Abby laughed, ruffling her hair. "Where to first?" "Buckshot." They walked out to the paddock. Buckshot stood under the tree, waiting without waiting. Josie ran to him, wrapped her arms around his neck. He dipped his head, gently resting his brow on her small shoulder. They stood like that, one young soul, one soul long torn and now whole, woven together by something invisible but unbreakable. "He's warm," Josie said, "like Daddy used to be." Abby choked back a tear. That night, under a sky full of stars, Abby sat on the porch steps, her weathered leather journal in hand. Inside were letters to Will, pages filled month by month with sorrow, recovery, and small moments of grace. She wrote, "Will, I wish you could meet Buckshot. You'd love him, because he's not a miracle. He's the result of something even stronger than miracles, trust. He didn't come to be rescued. He came to remind me that broken things can still stand again. I'm not just recovering, I'm living again, because of a soul who brought with him warmth from far away." She looked up. Buckshot was at the fence, watching her. Abby walked to him. She laid her hand on his shoulder, once slashed with whips, now covered in soft fur. "You don't just carry scars," she whispered. "You carry hope, and now you're giving it to the rest of us." And beneath the night sky, where the crescent moon rose over the Ozarks, a once-forgotten horse stood not as a survivor, but as a guide. Not with steel hooves, but with a light that couldn't be seen, only felt. The light of a soul who had forgiven the world. If you've ever believed that a wounded soul can still rise and pass that hope on to others, leave us a comment and let us know. Comment 0 if this story left you speechless. Comment 1 if you believe every living being deserves a second chance. And don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories, because the next tale might just show you that the greatest miracles sometimes come from those the world has turned away from.